sound right. Do police officers or bobbies, do they get to break the law whenever they want to just because they're wearing a badge? No. They are under the same laws as everybody else. And so the law of God said that all men are to be equal. Okay? Now, let's go to this right here. Now, let me go back to this. Okay? This is the Watchman broadcast for next week. God help me with this thing. This represents the old covenant. Now, a covenant basically means a contract. Okay? A contract. Here is a contract between God and mankind. There's an old contract, and then there's a new contract. Okay? And the new contract nullifies the old contract. Okay, you need that's simple contract law, by the way. I have a fascination with the law. I'm not a lawyer. I haven't studied law per se, but I do have a fascination with the law because most of what's in the Bible is the law of God, and I like how the law works. So let me explain to you contract law. Okay, and give you a little legal education here. Let's say that Ariel and Ariel lives in Phoenix, AZ. Let's say that Ariel and let's say that she was going to, let's say she was going to buy a car from me, okay? And, or she was going to, let's say she was going to move here and she was going to rent an apartment that I had. I don't have an apartment, but let's just say that, okay? And so Ariel comes out here, and anybody who does any kind of rental thing know that you have to have a lease agreement, okay? There's a piece of paper with all this black ink on it that spells out what I, as the lessor, whatever, I have the apartment, I'm going to rent it out to Ariel. It spells out my responsibility, and it spells out her responsibility. And it says that I'm going to give her this little thing to live in, and she's going to pay me, $400 a month or whatever it is. She's going to do that every month for a year. She's going to give me a security deposit. I will pay the water bill. She's responsible for her own electric. I will cut the grass. She's going to keep the apartment in clean order. That's the terms of the contract, okay? Now, here's what contract law says. Once Ariel and I agree to what's on this piece of paper right here, and we sign the document. We sign it with our signature, okay, putting our mark on it. Once we agree to what this piece of paper is, let's say that the next day I go to Ariel. We've already signed the lease. I go to Ariel and say, you know what? I know the lease says $400 a month. I tell you what, I like you, and so I'm only going to make you pay $300 a month. And she says, well, okay. And we shake hands on it. Okay? Now, did you know that in a court of law, an oral contract made after the signature of a written contract is of no effect? Okay? The contract between me and Ariel only exists between the four walls of this piece of paper right here. So even if we come to an agreement orally after we sign this document, that oral contract is of no effect whatsoever unless we take what we said orally and add it to this contract or come up with a new contract and say, okay, the old contract is no good anymore. Now we have a new contract, and this is the terms of it, and we both signed that agreement. That is standard contract law. Now, here's where I'm going with this. You listen to this, okay? And Joanne, I promise you, this is going to lead into what your question is, okay? Here is the contract, the covenant between God and mankind, okay? By the way, it was signed by God himself in blood. I love that. Okay? It was sprinkled, signed in blood. That was God's seal that he is agreeing to the terms of the contract. You know that verse in 1 John that says if we confess our sins, he is faithful and what? What's that word? Just. You know what just is? Justice. That means God is going to abide by the terms of the contract. I love this. God himself, is not above the contract. He's not above it. Okay? Thy word hast thou magnified above all thy name. That's what that means. That means that the word is final authority on everything, and not even God himself is above the contract. We see a picture of that in the Old Testament with the law of the Medes and the Persians. You remember that? You remember when they went to when the guys went to the king and they said, King, we need a law here in Babylon that says nobody can worship any god except your God. And if we catch them worshiping any other god, then they're to be thrown into the lion's den. And so the king said, that's good law. So he writes it out and says, anybody who is caught worshiping any other god than my God is going to be thrown into the lion's den. Sealed it with the law of the Medes and Persians. So they come to, there was a setup. So they come to him and they said, Daniel, we caught Daniel. He goes out in his window. See, Daniel wasn't afraid. Goes out in his window 3 times a day and he prays. And they caught him. And they brought him before the king. And the king loved Daniel. And the king just stuck his head down in his face. And they said, King, it's your law. And not even you are above the law. Not even you are above the law. King, you must do what the law says. I love this because the king didn't say, can't do it. Daniel's my friend. I won't do it. The king was not above the contract. So you know what they did? Now here's the wisdom of God and the foolishness of man. The law prescribed that Daniel was to be thrown in the lion's den. The law never actually said that the lions had to eat him and kill him. Genius! So they did according to the law. They threw Daniel in the lion's den. Get up the next morning. Daniel, oh Daniel! Daniel's saying, hey king, how you doing? Come on down. Meet my new friends. This is Leo, and this is Oscar, and this is Felix the cat over here. These are my new friends. And he's sitting there, and the lions are sitting there going, I love it. The law was fulfilled, and Daniel lived. Not even the king was above the contract. So if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And so you understand now that the new contract overrode the terms of the original contract. That's the difference between Old Testament and New Testament. Now watch this, okay? Here's where I'm going with this. Nobody, once a contract has been signed and agreed to, nobody has the right to go beyond the boundaries of the 4 corners of this paper and say God is something different than this. Nobody. Remember what the devil did in the Garden of Eden. Remember what he did. He said, yea, hath God said, ye shall not surely die, for God doth know. You know what he was saying? There's something that's outside of this right here. God's contract with Adam. God's contract with Adam was, of all the trees of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, lest ye die, or thou shalt surely die. Okay? That was the contract. And Adam was going on the terms of that contract. The devil came along after that and went outside of that. That is illegal in contract law. You cannot do that. Here's the contract that the government agreed to with the people of America. It defines what the government can and cannot do, and it defines what the people can and cannot do. This contract is limited to what is on the pages. This area right here is the limits of the contract. Now, this contract can be amended by the terms of this contract. There's a way to amend the Constitution. But nobody, no president, no congressman, no judge has the authority or the power to go outside of the bounds of this contract and make up a new law that contradicts what's here. The Patriot Act. This contract, the Constitution, this contract said that the citizens of America should not have to allow the government to go through their papers and effects, because the British soldiers, sorry Jill, the British soldiers were kicking in doors, rifling through people's stuff, trying to see if they were guilty of treason against King George. And the founders of our government said, we're not going to allow our government to do that without due process. So they go to a judge and say, Judge, here we have probable cause to search their premises. The judge says, okay, that's within the bounds of the contract, and we all agreed to that. The Patriot Act says, we make a new law outside of this that says we're going to send the government in on a sneak and peek. They're actually going to go in, look through your stuff, find the evidence, and then go to a private tribunal without due process and then get permission to take whatever we want. Now the government says not only do we have a right to detain American citizens who are a party to the contract, detain American citizens without due process, but now the Obama administration says we can now kill American citizens if we think they're terrorists. That is outside of this contract. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay? Now, Joanne asked me a question. And it was a great question. Because of the way she asked it. She said, Robert and I love witchcraft in the church. I mean, she doesn't love practicing witchcraft in the church. She's talking about the video I made. It was awesome. I do have a question. This is something that kind of bothers me. Here in the South, there are a lot of churches with women pastors, bishops, deaconesses, etc. There are also a lot of husband and wife co-pastors. We have that here in